Hey everybody, mel0n here. Welcome back to another episode of the mel0n Review. Today we're going to be doing an unboxing and first impressions on a mouse I've actually been trying to get my hands on for a very long time from a brand I've been wanting to work with for a very long time. Today we are finally taking a look at the Endgame Gear OP1 AK. I haven't worked with Endgame Gear before, but I have heard a lot of really good things about their mice, particularly in terms of repairability, because apparently all of their mice are extremely user serviceable, which really caught my eye because, as you know, I'm very big on repairability in the peripheral space, and having mice that are very user serviceable seems right up my alley, so I'm very interested to see how actually serviceable the OP1 AK is. On top of that, this mouse does have a lot of other really cool features that did kind of make it stand out from a lot of the other mice I was potentially going to look at, so I'm very happy to finally get a chance to look at the OP1 AK. Now, thank you very much to Endgame Gear, who was kind enough to send out the OP1 AK for me to look at. I greatly appreciate it, and it's an honor to finally work with them. As always, with everything you see on the channel, I'll be unbiased on everything you see here, regardless of a free or discounted unit. Now, today's is going to be a quick unboxing and first impressions of this mouse. I will have a much more in-depth review of this mouse out in a couple weeks after I have time to do some testing. Following that review, I will also have a full teardown of this mouse, going over how to service your mouse yourself, again checking to see how serviceable this mouse actually is, but I will have those videos following this video in a couple weeks. So if you want to see a full, much more in-depth review of this mouse, or see how this mouse is actually built on the inside and how to take it apart yourself, get subscribed so you don't miss those videos coming out in a couple weeks. But let's go ahead and get right into the unboxing of the OP1 AK. Alright, now the OP1 AK is a successor, I guess you could say, to the original OP1. There have been some slight changes, but the mouses are pretty much the same. Obviously, the big difference between them is that the OP1 AK has AK polling rate, where the OP1 does not have AK polling rate. There have been some other small changes in this mouse, but I'll talk about that in the full review. Now, there's a couple really cool things about this mouse that I mentioned before that really made me want to look at it. Number one is the serviceability of this mouse, because this mouse has hot swappable switches, and this mouse comes with a screwdriver, which is really cool. I know it's such like a small thing, but having a unit come with a screwdriver is a really nice touch, and since these are user replaceable switches and they can be hot swapped, that is something very cool to see. Now, Endgame Gear does also sell like switch packs on their website, so if you want to try different switch types, you can, but for now we're just going to use the stock ones. Now, the stock ones here on the OP1 AK are these KLGX switches. Now, these are made in collaboration with Endgame Gear, which is very cool to see, so I'm interested to see how these work. Now, one other really cool thing I like about the OP1 AK, not even on the mouse itself, just on the box, is that on the box it actually tells you what the internals of the mouse are. As someone who spends a lot of time taking mice apart to find out what's actually on the inside of a lot of mice, because a lot of brands have a habit of calling things that are just standard ones their own branding, and makes things very confusing to find out what's actually on the inside of a lot of mice. Having everything just listed on the side of the box is such a nice thing to see. Now, the OP1 AK is also coming in at 50.5 grams, and it is a fairly averagely sized claw grip optimized shape with, I would say, optimized best for medium hands, but we'll talk about the grip styles and that kind of stuff more in the full review. But that's enough about what's on the outside of the box of the OP1 AK. Let's talk about what's on the inside of the box. Alrighty, now getting the box open, the first thing we see, of course, is the OP1 AK. Now, I'm going to put the mouse aside for now, and then we're going to talk about what's inside this little packaging here. Now, there's a couple really cool things in here. First off, of course, you have your regulatory labels and that kind of stuff, and then you also have a user manual. Now, one thing I love about this user manual is that it tells you how to take apart the mouse, which is really nice. A lot of brands have these like super tiny little decals to tell you how to take the mouse apart for recycling, but this user guide actually gives you instructions on how to swap the switches and disassemble the unit. Of course, the diagrams aren't like the biggest, of course, but this is a really nice thing to see here. And as I mentioned before, this unit comes with a freaking screwdriver, which is so cool. I know this is such like a minor thing, but having a mouse come with a screwdriver just speaks to the repairability of the unit itself. And if a company is confident with the user taking the mouse apart and doing stuff on the inside, that speaks very good to the overall durability and the quality of the product. So just having this really tiny little screwdriver in the box, while it may not seem like much, it does actually mean a lot to people like myself who really do care about repairability. So I love to see this included here with the OP1 AK. We also have a set of grip tapes here in the box. Now, surprisingly, the OP1 AK does not come with any kind of click covers. It's only side covers, which is fine, I guess. It depends on how good the coating is on the OP1 AK, of course. And Endgame Gear mice generally have really good coatings, so I'm not super concerned about that. But the grip tape itself is fine. It's this kind of like tri-head screw design. It feels okay, has decent gripability, nothing really to write home about. We also have a small little cable wrap included in the box, and lastly, we have a set of skates. Now, one thing you'll notice right away on these skates is that these are control skates, but these control skates have holes in them. So this is one thing I've really been wanting to see a lot of other brands do, and something I'm incredibly happy to see here on the OP1 AK, where this is designed to have the access screws on the base of the mouse accessible even with the PTFE skates on it. This is such a nice thing to see, because again, it's really frustrating having to take a mice apart and having to waste a bunch of PTFE plastic. Having the holes cut out here is such a nice attention to detail. This is really awesome to see. And if we look on the bottom of the OP1 AK itself, even the pre-installed speed skates on the bottom of the OP1 AK out of the box also have the access screws on the bottom visible and easily accessible, which is a really nice thing to see. So that's all for the included accessories. Let's talk about the mouse itself next. Alrighty, so here we have the OP1 AK itself. Now, as I mentioned before, this mouse is a little smaller than I thought it was going to be, but despite it being a little smaller, this very claw grip optimized shape does feel very good on my 7.5 by 5 inch hands. It does have a very high shell hump, which does give a lot of contact in the middle, palm, thenar, and hyper thenar, so it does feel very comfortable in my larger hand size. Maybe on the borderline for an aggro claw grip instead of a natural claw grip, but it still is very comfortable. The coating on the mouse is exceptionally good. It feels very similar to the coating we found on the Zowie U2, maybe a little bit grippier, but I'll have to see how this holds up for the full review when it comes to moisture and that kind of stuff. But the coating does feel very, very solid off of first impressions. Now, the main buttons here also feel very solid. They are kale switches, but I don't really use too often, but they do feel very, very solid. No real problems with them. They're very light, very spammable. They have a really nice rebound to them, which is great to see. The side buttons also feel very similar to the main clicks, maybe slightly higher in the actuation weight, but they do feel very solid. I do notice a bit of a difference between the coating on the main buttons and the side buttons, though. I think the side buttons are just regular plastic, but I'll confirm that for the full review. Scroll wheel also feels good. Scroll wheel click also feels very solid as well. Overall, the unit does feel very, very good. Now, this unit does weigh in at 50.5 grams. The weight balancing is pretty much perfect on this unit, aside from being a little front heavy, of course, due to the cable, but that's to be expected on a wired mouse, but it does feel very, very well balanced. Now, speaking of the cable, of course, this being a wired mouse, the quality of the wire is going to make or break this unit. Now, thankfully, Endgame Gear has done something very, very clever here with the OP1 AK, where they have tilted the cable coming out of the mouse to around 20 degrees, which is lovely to see. Again, having it flat is a little bit of an issue in terms of cable drag. This is really, really nice to see. It's a really great attention to detail. On top of that, the cable also feels very solid. It is a paracord cable with a fabric wrapping. It does feel pretty solid. It does have a fair amount of flex to it, but it is also pretty rigid as well. It's decently sized as well, so it's going to fit in most bungees. It fit on my Pulsar ES bungee completely fine, no problems there as well, which is great to see. In terms of build quality, this unit also does feel extremely solid. There's no creaking, flexing so far. It feels very, very solid, but I'll have to see how it holds out over testing, of course. All right, well, that's pretty much it for first impressions physically. I'm going to go ahead and plug this into my computer, do a couple Kovacs runs to see how this mouse performs initially, and I'll be back for some final thoughts. Alrighty, now in terms of in-game performance, just off a couple runs of Kovacs, the OP1K actually performed very well. I didn't test the high polling rate yet. I will test that for the full review, but I just set it to 1600 DPI and I just set the polling rate to 1K just to get a first impressions of the mouse, and it did feel very solid. The coating is exceptionally good, even for my sweatier hands. It did hold up very well, but I'll have to see how it holds up long term, of course. The shape of the OP1AK is also another highlight here, just because it is a very, very claw grip optimized shape, and despite my larger hands, this mouse is still very, very claw grippable. Obviously more of an aggro claw grip, but it still feels very, very comfortable in game. The stock skates are also pretty good because there is a pre-installed set of stock speed skates. They feel pretty solid overall as well. I'll probably end up removing them and putting on aftermarkets, of course, but they do feel pretty solid for stock skates, which is nice to see. But honestly, overall, the OP1K feels very, very solid. Honestly, I'm kind of shocked with how good this mouse is. I've known of Endgame Gear for a long time, but I've just never used their products. But if I knew their products were all this repairable and they all performed this well, I probably would have gotten them a lot sooner. So I've been kind of sleeping on Endgame Gear quite a bit here. But this mouse is very, very solid so far. I'm very impressed. But of course, we'll have to see how it holds up over long-term testing. Of course, short-term, it only gives you half the picture. I'm very interested to see how the coating in this mouse's durability holds out over long-term. I'm interested to see how it's built on the inside and how truly user serviceable it is. And of course, where I'm very, very interested to see how good this AK pulling rate implementation is. Since it's using the same MCU as the HyperX Pulsar Haze 2, I'm hoping it's going to be at that level of really good implementation, but those will all be topics for the full review. So thank you very much for watching my unboxing and first impressions of the Endgame Gear OP1 AK. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you again to Endgame Gear, who was kind enough to send this over for review. I greatly appreciate it. As I mentioned at the top of the video, I will have a much more in-depth review of the OP1 AK out in a couple weeks following this video, and I will have a teardown video following that. So if you want to see my long-term thoughts on this mouse and a teardown of how this mouse is actually built on the inside and how repairable it is, be sure to get subscribed here so you don't miss those videos coming out in a couple weeks. But that is going to be everything for my unboxing and first impressions of the Endgame Gear OP1 AK. Thank you very much for watching as always, and I will catch you guys in the full review and the teardown of the OP1 AK in a couple weeks. Peace.